Ah, guys, the month of October is finally upon us. One of the best months of the year. Just think about it. You got fucking leaves changing, beautiful atmosphere, it's not too hot, not too cold, perfect temperature. You got like the whole Halloween thing and the creepy atmosphere and, that transition of everything dying off and, the harvest, Thanksgiving, pumpkin pie, fucking turkey, spending time with family, friends. It's just a great time. The only problem is you get fucking sick with these fucking weather changes like I am right now. So congested. So sorry if my voice sounds kind of nasally, but have a cold. But you know what, guys? The best part about the month of October, Black Sabbath. That's right, guys. During these months, I always crank the Sabbath full blast. I mean, these guys were made for the month of October, especially with the whole creepy atmosphere in their music, the whole Halloween kind of thing. They're the perfect band to listen to. And honestly, I listen to them year round. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. Currently, they're in my top 5 favorite bands of all time. So that just goes to show how much I love Sabbath. And today, frankly, I'm going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite albums, 1971's Master of Reality, which was the third Sabbath album, and probably the most definitive Sabbath album. Now, most people would say that Paranoid is their most definitive album, but I tend to disagree with that. I think Master of Reality, if you want to get a sense of what Black Sabbath is really about, just listen to this album, and you will have a 100% understanding of how amazing this band is. And now, it's not to say that it's my favorite album by Black Sabbath, although it's probably like my second favorite or third favorite. But then again, they have so many fucking amazing albums. But it's definitely their most definitive. I mean, this is the album you listen to if you want to get into Black Sabbath. And what I love about this album is that it's a perfect mix of like deep album cuts and classic hits. And I guess Paranoid was the same way as well. But Paranoid really does have a lot of songs that I've kind of been overexposed to at this point. I still love them. But the title track, Iron Man, I feel like I've heard those songs like too many times at this point. But I never get that burnout with Master of Reality. I mean, it always sounds fresh. And there's just such an interesting history behind this album, such an interesting backstory. And it's just so fucking good, guys. I mean, the review can end right here with that. I mean, it's just so amazing. And it's just great how it's a 34-minute album, very short, very compact, but every single second of the album counts. I mean, there is not one little bit of filler. Well, questionably, there might be, depending on who you ask, but for me, there is absolutely no filler on this album. It's their heaviest album, their hardest hitting, their best lyrics, the best Geezer Butler bass performance, the best Tony Iommi riffs, and it just has this dark, overbearing atmosphere. And, oh man, we'll get into that as I get into the review, but it's just such a special album. And you look at the album cover, and it's so crappy, but it's so iconic. I mean, you got Black Sabbath written in those weird kind of like morphed lettering, and that's it on a black background. And at this point, it's so iconic, but back then, people must have looked at it and said, like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, there's like no artistic quality to the album cover. But I still love it. I mean, again, it's freaking iconic. And honestly, this album right here, the first Black Sabbath album, which you'll see right behind me over there, that's the album that kick-started metal, but it had a lot of jazz influence, a lot of blues influence, kind of like permeating in there. So it wasn't a purely metal album, but this is the first album where we can say, holy shit, this is heavy metal from start to finish. I mean, there's no question. I don't think anyone's going to question that. And it probably was the heaviest album at the time. And just, again, the most definitive Black Sabbath album in terms of influence on the music scene. I mean, I can't think of an album other than this and the first Black Sabbath album that had more of an impact on the music scene. I mean, you have a band here that's credited with creating a genre of music. I mean, sure, you had bands, at the same time like Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Blue Cheer in the late 60s, Jimi Hendrix, that were really progressing music into a heavier territory. But Black Sabbath were undeniably the first band to really just go over the fence and full on create the heavy metal genre. So that's amazing that you can attribute one genre of music starting off with one band. So in that sense, Black Sabbath may be the most influential band of all time, right up there with the Beatles. and Master of Reality is a wild ride. I mean, this was a band just firing at all cylinders. And really, what this album comes down to is that Black Sabbath had been touring as hard as fuck. I mean, after Paranoid, they'd been pretty much touring all over Europe, all over the world. And, they already had their debut album under their belts and was highly influential. And they had a strong cult following. And I got to emphasize that right now. Black Sabbath these days, it's a highly regarded band. I mean, they recently set up a Black Sabbath exhibition at the Birmingham Museum, which is incredible. And they're highly regarded these days. So many artists have just cited them as like their primary influence. But at the time, we really have to understand that Black Sabbath was a cult band. I mean, they had no mainstream media airplay. They had horrible reviews right from the beginning. Just terrible fucking reviews. Just nauseatingly bad. Just honestly, like, I can handle people's opinions, but you could tell that these reviews were just so spiteful, just so close-minded, especially the one by by Robert Christgau, who's known for giving a lot of shitty reviews to now revered albums. You know what he said about Master of Reality? He said, let me just make sure I get this right here. He said it was a dim-witted, amoral exploitation. What a fucking moron. I mean, I'm sorry, but this guy's, I can handle differing opinions, but that's just one of the most moronic things I can ever think of. And as I get more into the concept of the album and really what this album's all about, I think we'll understand why. But yeah, they were basically getting like terrible reviews. And really it was a cult following because a lot of people knew that there was a lot more to this band that met the eye. I mean, sure, they, like, to the older generation, they probably just sounded like heavy noise-making Neanderthals. But to the younger generation, this was the newest and most exciting music you can possibly imagine. And rather than, dabbling with like fantasy themes and, which I love. I mean, when bands like Genesis and Yes, they dabble into that fantasy territory, it's fantastic. It's so atmospheric, so imaginative. But Black Sabbath were the polar opposites of that. I mean, these guys were realists to the core. They would talk about the most disturbing, the most real, the most pressing matters at the time. And especially with the Vietnam War happening at the time, they attracted a lot of Vietnam veterans to their concerts with their anti-war message and their just realistic, depressing depiction of, soldiers coming back from Vietnam, being on heroin and all kinds of things like that. The religious themes, the dark themes, I guess you can argue satanic themes really drew in a lot of people that were starting to like dabble into the occult. Although Black Sabbath were not an occult band, as we'll get into in the review. But they were really an underground band. And at that point, they had only gotten like a few days to record their previous albums in the studio. I mean, they would get like 2 days, just go in and basically play what they were playing live and record it, which is just fucking amazing considering the quality of their first two albums. But with Master of Reality, they had a lot more studio time, and they had a lot more time to really like fully develop and fully flesh out the songs rather than just tacking on like jam sessions and improv kind of things like you'd see on the first Sabbath album. And that's nothing against the first Sabbath album, which is my favorite Black Sabbath album. That's just my personal preference, but subjectively, either this or Sabbath Bloody Sabbath are probably the best Sabbath albums. I just have a sweet spot for the debut for my personal taste. But yeah, so they really had a lot of time to develop the album and really rework and overwork a lot of the songs to really just make them as tight as possible. And at this point, as I mentioned before, the band was touring nonstop and they were just really firing at all cylinders. I mean, the tightness and the musicianship on this album is just, it's like an exponential rise from Paranoid in the debut album. I mean, everything just fits into place. And the main innovation from this album was the down tuning of the instruments. And I'm 100% sure that all the metal fans know what I'm talking about, but I'm just going to explain it for a lot of like the newer fans and the newer people coming into Black Sabbath, just how epic this story is behind the down tuning of the instruments, because it's the most metallic thing I've ever heard in my life. The most fucking epic and fitting story for such a heavy band as Black Sabbath. So I'm sure, as we all know, Tony Iommi, he was in a tragic accident. He was working in a scrap metal shop, a factory in Birmingham. And he fucking, needless to say, he hated the fucking job. And he was about to quit. He was actually debating going into work this day. He was like, that's it, I'm just not going to show up. But you know what? His mom pressured him to go, so he showed up to work like a good Birmingham gentleman that he was. And by the way, this was before Black Sabbath formed. And he was, he was working the sheet metal thing. He wasn't paying attention, and he moved his hand too far into the machine, and the blade sliced off the tips of his 2 fingers. That's right. And at this point, he was getting quite good at playing guitar, and he went into a deep depression because he thought he would never be able to play guitar again. And then a friend came to him in the hospital and showed him this record by Django Reinhardt, who was also a guitar player who lost the tips of his fingers. And he was just such a creative, such an amazing guitar player, overcame the adversity, and just went on to have an amazing career. And that really inspired Tony Iommi. So he's like, you know what, fuck this. I'm not letting this shit stop me. So what did he do? He went home. He made these 2 kind of like finger extensions with wax or plastic. I can't really remember. But basically these 2 like little things he would attach to his fingers that he still uses to this day. And he played guitar. And it was incredibly painful. But Tony Iommi's the fucking badass motherfucker that he is. He powered through the adversity and he kept playing. And those first 2 Sabbath albums and tours were excruciating for him. But needless to say, on the 3rd album, Master of Reality, he figured out a way to lessen his pain by down-tuning the guitar 1.5 steps. And Geezer Butler would down-tune his bass as well to fit in with that. And what resulted from this was the heaviest, most distorted sound you could fucking imagine. Basically giving birth to doom metal and heavy metal as we know it today. And it's just freaking amazing. I love that story. I love telling that story because literally, like, metal gave birth to metal, if you think about it in that sense. Like, that, if that sheet metal accident didn't happen, we might not get the classic metal sound that we know today. So, what an incredible story. And the funny thing is that they down-tuned the guitars and bass, and they thought, oh, okay, it's great now. It's gonna fit Ozzy's his lower vocal range. And then what does Ozzy fucking do? Crazy bastard that he is. He sings as high as fuck, higher than ever. And although he wouldn't get quite as high as he does on Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, his voice is definitely higher pitched and more technically amazing on this album than the previous albums. So go figure, Ozzy just goes against the grain with everything that he does. And it just creates an incredible, intense atmosphere. And it's probably, what really gives this album its character. So the album, again, they were a cult band. It went gold on pre-sales alone. I mean, this was a really successful album. And the fan base knew where it was at. And they fucking devoured this album. And it's now regarded as one of the best Black Sabbath albums. It really propelled their career forward. I mean, without this and Paranoid coming before it, with the debut album, it wasn't as successful. So who knows what would have happened. But Master Reality really solidified that. And it's just considered one of the best albums of all time. I mean, and again, the foundation of metal as we know it. So now let's get into my overall review. All right, so what's the distinguishing feature of this album? What sets it apart from the first 2 Sabbath albums? Well, the first thing you're going to fucking notice is that it's a lot heavier than the first 2 Sabbath albums. And that's saying something, because the first 2 Sabbath albums, they're fucking heavy. But this one here, it just takes the darkness, takes the, the grittiness, the dirtiness, the heaviness to a whole different level. I mean, and whether that be because of the down-tuned instruments, which plays a huge role, or just that the band were shifting into a darker territory, darker songwriting. I think it's both those factors combined. Just make it one of their darkest albums. And in that sense, it does have a lot less variation than a lot of the other Sabbath albums, especially with Volume 4 and Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, Sabotage, where the band was really getting experimental. This album, although it is experimental, I mean, this was the first album to feature such a heavy distorted sound. But it between the songs on the album, there isn't a whole lot of variation. There's 2 little acoustic numbers on the album. Well, actually, 1 acoustic number and then 1 little medieval sounding intro to one of the songs that kind of give it a different vibe, a lighter vibe. But overall, the songs on this album are extremely heavy. And I mean that in the best possible sense. I mean, oh my God, guys, the riffs on this album are just legendary. They're second to none. Some of the greatest metal riffs of all time. And I mean, song after song after song with just, oh my god, like top tier metal riffs. It's just incredible. I mean, usually when you hear a metal album, you're expecting like one or two or three of the songs to have standout riffs and the rest to be kind of like, formulaic, generic, but not on this fucking album, baby. I mean, every single song on this album has a unique riff, except for Solitude, which is kind of like the depressing ballad of the album, which is another point of variation. I forget about that song sometimes, but it's great. But yeah, overall, a very dark, very foreboding atmosphere on this album. And you know what? I might get a lot of slack for this, but I'm going to call this a concept album. And I really do think that this is a concept album. I mean, almost every single song on this album deals with death, facing the end, or the apocalypse. I mean, it's a really spiritual album in that sense, where it really asks a lot of like existential questions about like God's relationship with man and how man's destroying the world, and just like where the world is going from here. And I mean, it takes on like a lot of people thought Sabbath were Satanists at this point, but really it just comes across as the band kind of warning the world, like, hey guys, like, start noticing what we're doing to the world, because before we know it, this place is going to either be fucking laid to waste or just you wouldn't want to live in it because of either nuclear war, pollution, overall greed, corruption, things like that. And I'm probably doing a horrible job of explaining it, but those are the main themes of the album. And I think that more than any other Sabbath album, it feels unified in the sense of it being a concept album. And that's just my opinion. A lot of people wouldn't consider this a concept album. But I think other than Sweet Leaf, it really does have that unifying theme of like facing the end and facing the apocalypse and, where the world is going from here. And I mean, that's incredible. It's such a dark album. And again, it's promoting the good side of that. It's not saying like, this is where we're going, there's no hope, like we're all fucking going to hell. They're saying like, we could still change it. There's still time to change our ways. And it's just a really powerful message. And I really think that Geezer Butler really nailed the lyrics on this album. I mean, these are the best Black Sabbath lyrics I've heard from any album. They're just fantastically crafted, so meaningful. They get me extremely emotional. And there's some extremely atmospheric and disturbing imagery on this album as well. So that's another reason why it's amazing. Now, as far as the technical elements go, Geezer Butler, I already mentioned Tony Iommi's riffs are like top of the line. But Geezer Butler is literally firing on all cylinders. His bass playing is just definitely better than on the first two albums, definitely more noticeable, and really prove why he's one of the best bass players of all time. I mean, he doesn't follow Tony Iommi's riffs. He's doing his own thing in the background during the solos and during the riffs that are equally interesting to Tony Iommi's riffs. And just when you're listening to the song, you kind of actually get distracted from the guitar work and the guitar solos by these fucking bass lines, which are just so in your face. And really, I think that this is probably Geezer Butler's best performance on the bass. I'm no bass player, so I could be wrong. But for me, when I listen to this album, I'm really focusing in on the bass, which is a really unique component of the album. Again, Tony Iommi's riffs are incredible. And Ozzy, as I mentioned, he's hitting really high notes, notes he was never hitting before. And, one second. And, just sounding completely different from the first few albums. Now, speaking of the first two Sabbath albums, I think I already alluded to this earlier in the review, but this album really does have a lot less blues influence, a lot less jazz influence than the first few albums, which really, again, like they were the origin of heavy metal, but they did draw from a lot of those influences, which I personally love, which is why the first album is my favorite. But on this album, they really just came into their own sound and really were just doing something incredibly different. And that just made the album a lot tighter than their previous albums, which had a lot of like extended jams, extended guitar solos. Because again, they were just coming into the studio and just doing what they were doing live. And live, you're going to throw in a few improvs, you're going to throw in a few like extended solos, jam sessions. But on this album, they really came into their own and just made it a really tight album. So although it is 34 minutes, every second counts. And honestly, that's what makes it a special album. I mean, when you listen to it, there's not one thing you'd want to take out from the album. Even Orchid and Embryo, which are just short little like musical interludes, perfectly fit onto the album and just give it that like little refreshing palate cleanser you need between these heavy monolith songs. So without further ado, guys, let's get into the track by track discussions because this album has just so many masterpieces on it. I'm sorry, guys. I couldn't resist. I couldn't fucking resist. I mean, this album here opens up with one of the greatest heavy metal songs of all time, Sweet Leaf. And at first, this song might not strike you as a classic. I mean, it's a song about smoking marijuana, something the band was obviously heavily into at the time. And it just, on the surface, it just seems like, just like your standard Black Sabbath song. Maybe I'm on drugs, I don't know. But like over the years, this song has just grown exponentially for me, and I consider it a fucking masterpiece. I mean, everything about it is just incredible. And although I mentioned that this album is, I kind of consider it a concept album, and this song obviously has nothing to do with like the apocalypse and like end times and the world going to shit. It's like probably the one exception on the album, but I still love the lyrics. I mean, this song was just so progressive for the time. I mean, think about it. Now we have like weed, we have marijuana legalized here in Canada, in a lot of states in the US, and it's just gone from being such a taboo drug to being like, now we're thinking about prescribing it for like chronic pain and like, loss of appetite, things like that. It's incredible how far it came. And there Black Sabbath was in 1971, writing a song about weed. And I mean, like, all the musicians at the time were smoking, but Black Sabbath were the only band that had the fucking balls to write a song like promoting its use. And I love that in and of itself. I don't smoke marijuana. I'm not a stoner, but I have a lot of friends that do, and like I have nothing against that, and it's always a great time. So if you want to smoke some weed, be my guest. Be careful about psychosis though, that can happen. Anyway, I'm getting off onto a tangent. Sweet Leaf is just an incredible fucking song. I mean, it opens up with the most iconic intro of any Sabbath song. I'm sure we all agree on that. With Tony Iommi just ripping on this joint and coughing. And they captured that cough on camera and just, I guess, sped it up. And it's just one of the most incredible intros. One of the most fitting intros. And then we get into one of the dirtiest, filthiest riffs in Black Sabbath's career. I mean, it's genius. The riff opening this song is just one of the grooviest, one of the most head-banging riffs you can ever imagine. And Geezer Butler's bass playing in the background just perfectly accentuates it, and it's in your face. And then Ozzy comes in, and his voice is fucking through the roof, high-pitched. It's so intense, and it's hilarious because it's just a song about, the band smoking weed, but the way he's singing it makes it sound like he's talking about the end of the world or something. I mean, his vocals are just incredibly high-pitched on this song. Something that I'm sure came as a shock to a lot of the Sabbath fans who were used to his lower register vocals on the first two albums. But it's just, it adds to that intensity. And again, the bass playing is just pulsating throughout the entire song. Honestly, and there's such a swing to the guitar riff on this. I mean, it's a heavy riff, but it has that swing to it in the background. And I don't know if it's Bill Ward doing his jazzy thing on the drums, but it just gives you that, like, like you just want to, like, I could picture an orchestra, or not an orchestra, but like a horn section playing that, and it would sound perfect in a jazz band. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments below. Am I fucking crazy or what? But by far the best part of the song comes at about the 2.5 minute mark. The band gets into this absolutely insane breakdown. I mean, it's incredible. And Geezer Butler's bass is just literally pulsating in your ears. It's fucking the most intense thing I ever heard. And Tony Iommi's guitar riff this guitar part builds up with the and then all of a sudden Bill Ward comes in with one of the most schizophrenic, unconventional drum fills I've ever heard in my life, followed by another one of the most experimental Tony Iommi solos, before bringing it all back home with that swinging riff. And the outro is amazing as well. It just fades out, and you hear Ozzy in the background just singing, "All right now," and like, "I love you, won't you try it out?" Things like that. And honestly, it's a 10 out of 10 song. I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's just one of my favorite songs of all time, let alone Black Sabbath songs. And it's just grown on me exponentially throughout the years, from just being like, yeah, I enjoy that track, to being like one of my all-time favorites. And I've been listening to this song for about maybe 13, 14 years at this point, and it hasn't grown off me yet. I mean, I was headbanging to it today, for God's sake. So yeah, Sweet Leaf, one of the best Sabbath songs.
Have you ever thought
Ah, guys, track two is one of my personal favorites. After Forever. One of the most, I don't want to say underrated. I hate using that word because music is always subjective. And, like, really, what are you going to be comparing it to? But in my opinion, this is one of the most underappreciated Black Sabbath songs. I mean, this is right up there with the best of them. And I mean, oh my God, it's so fantastic. And I was so shocked when Black Sabbath played this live on their end tour. I was not expecting them to play this song, and they fucking played it, which is just incredible. And it's a controversial track because this was the song that really shattered people's beliefs that Black Sabbath were Satanists. I mean, literal like Satanists and occultists would follow the band around and like fucking sleep outside their hotel rooms and shit like that, thinking that Black Sabbath were some kind of higher power and like, you know, like in touch with like, you know, Satan and the occult. And then this song comes out, and the song is basically about, it's one of my favorite lyrics by Geezer Butler, one of my absolute favorite. It's basically about facing death and questioning your faith at the end of life. I mean, think about it. If you're an atheist throughout your entire life, would facing death totally change your opinion on that? Honestly, I think it might. To be honest, I'm not a very religious person, but I really do think that this song has a lot of spirit behind it. And I really do appreciate and understand the message behind it that, you know, coming from a Catholic background, you know, with Geezer Butler coming from a Catholic background, it really speaks volumes to me about, you know, like losing your faith and, you know, what really is it that like you lost your faith for logical reasons, or you let the world corrupt you and that's what made you lose your faith? So it's just really important questions to be asking a music audience. And there's lines on this song like, you know, God is the only way to love, and would you still be sure when your day is near? Say you don't believe. And just amazing lines like that are just so meaningful and so impactful. And honestly, like they get me emotional every time because it just really makes me reconsider life and really makes me think like, is there a higher power up there? Although we don't have like evidence behind it, like, you know, really, is there a higher power up there? Is what the song's asking, like questioning faith and everything. Anyway, all that existential shit aside, it's a fantastic song. And I mean, this song has three of the best riffs I ever heard in my life. I mean, the opening of the song, right after that weird kind of droning keyboard intro, which gives the song a really creepy, really weird setup. It gets in with that upbeat riff with the down, 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 do, 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 do. And again, the bass, this goes without saying, is just perfectly complementing the riff like all the other songs on the album. And then before you know it, it gets into that almost thrashing, grooving, you know, the which is like the main, I guess you can call it the main riff of the song. And Ozzy comes in and he's singing so, you know, so frantically, so fast, and just in such an odd way. I mean, no song really sounds like this vocally. And it took me a little while to get used to because of how unique the vocals sound on this song. I mean, Ozzy's singing, like nothing really rhymes in the song. Ozzy's just like basically rapping. Honestly, like the metal equivalent of rapping is basically how I can describe these lyrics, if that makes any sense. And just really powerful. And there's like a lot of drive behind the riff, a lot of drive behind the vocals. And honestly, and then it gets into another amazing riff, the third riff of the song, you know, the which evolves into this fantastic solo. And then it brings it all back home with the and again, without the bass, this song wouldn't be what it is. Oh man, top-notch Sabbath song. And again, the bass at the end of the song actually finishes with this kind of like bass freak out. And it honestly, there's not much more to say about it. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. It's one of the best Black Sabbath songs. Again, one of the greatest. But, you know, I wouldn't quite give it a 10 out of 10, but it's up there. And I'm really happy they played it live. Okay, guys, so I'm going to be lumping in track 3 and track 4 into one because they really work as one piece, and that's Embryo and Children of the Grave. And I'm sure every Black Sabbath fan knows Children of the Grave. I mean, it's one of their highest rated songs, and for good reason. I mean, this song is not overrated at all. I mean, it deserves all the praise it gets. It's one of the best fucking songs of all time, okay? One of the best fucking songs of all time. Everything about it is perfect. Every microsecond of this song is metal perfection. And oh my God, I'm getting so excited about it. I'm sorry, guys. I get intense when I talk about Black Sabbath. But, oh my fucking God. It blows my mind every time I hear it. Again, I've been hearing this album for 14 years. It never gets fucking old. One of the best metal songs ever. And starting it off, I mean, is the little instrumental track Embryo, which is a cool 1 minute little kind of medieval sounding guitar intro. I was about to say acoustic guitar, but it's not acoustic, it's electric. And it goes like this, like bow now 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 bow now 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 now. And some people actually consider this filler, but I don't know where they're coming from. It's just obviously a nice little palate cleanser before like the epicness that is Children of the Grave. Because I think right after Forever, with that crazy bass outro, I think you really do need like a little break, a little mental break to get you back into like the mood to listen to that heavy shit. Because Children of the Grave is a fucking assault. I mean, this is a metal assault. The riff on this song, people say it's the best Tony Iommi riff, and I can't argue with that. I mean, it's definitely the best, if not one of the best. Okay, probably Into the Void is probably his best riff. Oh my God, there's so many good Tony Iommi riffs, but Children of the Grave is definitely one of the best. And just the way it builds up with that bass intro, oh my God, you know all hell's about to break loose. And then when it does, it really fucking does. I mean, all hell does break loose. And this song really gets into the apocalyptic theme of the album, basically talking about nuclear war and how, like, if we're not careful, we'll inevitably destroy the planet Earth with nuclear weapons. Kind of like a follow-up to Electric Funeral and Paranoid, but this is a lot better than Electric Funeral. I mean, a lot better. And I do love Electric Funeral, but this song just has it all. The riffs, the guitar solos, the vocals. I wish Ozzy's vocals were a little bit higher in the mix, actually, but, you know, that's just a minor complaint about the production. But the song itself is just, honestly, there's not much more to say about it. It's metal perfection. And I mean, that breakdown in the middle is the definition of doom metal. I mean, when that riff comes in with the bow, bow now, bow now. I mean, it feels like you're literally facing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse coming right at you. And it's just such an incredible metal song. The riff is just, it blows my mind how Tony Iommi even came up with that riff. And I mean, Ozzy has described it as like the most kick-ass song they ever recorded. So if Ozzy's describing it that way, you know it's fucking amazing. And honestly, I saw the End Tour, Black Sabbath, their last concert in Toronto, and I really think the highlight of the whole concert was when they played Children of the Grave. I mean, you could tell Ozzy was getting so into it. He was headbanging. He was like, "Get your fucking hands in the air." And it was kind of a dead crowd for a Black Sabbath concert. I mean, the smell of marijuana was like permeating the air like no tomorrow. But like you could tell like the front row and like the first section of the audience were just like the older folks. They weren't really moving around that much. And, you know, I appreciate that. Like they want to listen to the music. But Ozzy was like really getting into it. And you could tell he was kind of getting a little bit exasperated about that. Thinking like, come on, get your fucking hands in the air. It's a party, you know. You know how Ozzy is. He's fucking crazy. But yeah, I was fucking going nuts. I mean, this song really gets me on my feet. And I mean, it's just such a meaningful song. And, you know, back then it was during the Cold War. So obviously the lyrics really rang true at the time. But even today, like, you know, in North Korea and things like that, like we really don't know where the hell the world's going in terms of like nuclear war. And I feel like, you know, if not in the next like 50 years, maybe in the next 100 years, there is the possibility of like nuclear warfare happening, you know, especially with the Middle East, but yeah, hopefully not. You know, I don't want to get nuked. No one does. I'll stay here in my fucking basement. Hopefully, I'll survive. But anyway, I'm getting off topic now. Let's see what else is there to say about this song. Yeah, oh, okay. Another main thing of this song that I love is that Bill Ward's drumming, as always, is just so freaking unconventional. I mean, like, I'm no musician, so I probably won't do a great job of explaining this, but it sounds like he's hitting pots and pans. Honestly, comment down below and tell me, like, what his technique was on this, because, like, it has such a shrill tone to the song, and it's so unconventional. I mean, for a heavy song like this, you would expect Bill Ward to go all out, like, fucking crazy like he does on like Under the Sun or something like that on Volume 4. But no, it just sounds like he's just hitting pots and pans. And it fits perfectly into the song. And that's just honestly, that's why Bill Ward is one of my favorite drummers. He's just one of the most unconventional. And when you listen to Bill Ward, you think like, what the fuck's going on? I mean, like this guy he's a fucking genius when it comes to drums. There's no questioning it. And this is just one of the prime examples of like just one of the strange drum sounds that Bill Ward came up with back then. And it's just so refreshing because today when you listen to metal, all the drummers sound the same. I don't know if it's just me, but all the drummers sound the same and it sounds really generic. But when you listen to Black Sabbath, you get those heavy riffs and like the weirdest drumming you can imagine. And it just keeps you engaged on so many levels. I mean, you got the guitar riffs, you got the fucking bass thumping in your ear, you got Bill Ward just like coming up with the craziest fills you can ever imagine. And it just makes for one of the best songs of all time, as I already mentioned. The outro is very creepy. The song kind of fades out with this droning guitar. And you have Ozzy whispering, "Children of the grave." Kind of implying that, like, the nuclear war did come to fruition and everyone's dead now. But the song does have a hopeful message saying that if we embrace peace, if we, settle our differences, we can overcome the temptation of nuclear war. And again, very uplifting themes. And 10 out of 10 song, I'm sure that goes without saying. It's a no-brainer. Moving on.